Our loving God in heaven, we thank you for this Sabbath day. For technology that can join us from such distant places. For the truths of the movement that fuses our hearts together, hearts and minds together. Please bless us with your presence as we continue to look at these issues. We do ask for the Holy Spirit in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, thank you. All right, just a quick review of what we looked at in the first session. We looked at an article from the New York Times that explained the connection between the manosphere at an individual level and the manosphere that we see in the Trump government. I think the manosphere represents that combination of church and state and the church riding the dragon power. We understand church to be much broader than that, representing culture and the desires of society. We went back and started tracing the dragon through history. And we've come to 1798. In Revelation 12, we're told that it is the dragon that makes war with the wants to destroy the woman in the wilderness, the church in the wilderness. This is, it's going to follow the remnant of God and has the faith of Jesus. And it's going to follow that church into the new world, into the United States. So the marker for that is 1798. We're seeing one power get a deadly wound and die. The papacy gets it's revolutionary France that delivers that wound and death to the papacy. And as we see the United States rise to power in 1798, we see it standing up against revolutionary France. We looked at a political cartoon from 1798. And saw how the world, or Great Britain, Europe, saw the interaction between the United States and France. this diplomatic problem was called the XYZ affair. Where France is desperate for money. Its former ally has made a treaty with its enemy, Britain. So it's been confiscating goods off American trade ships. This whole history is about trade, about economics. The United States is losing money. It needs this trade with Great Britain. So John Adams is going to stand up against France and say, not a dime. One of the ambassadors had it's a famous saying. And I can't remember it verbatim, so I'll paraphrase. But he said, not a dime. We're not going to give you a dime, France. We're going to put our money into the military. And they did. The Marine Corps and the Navy was properly founded that year. Formally founded. But what John Adams, the president, is going to do is take advantage of this situation. And bring in the 4 Alien and Sedition Acts. This is to strengthen the executive power. So it's this XYZ affair doesn't just affect the relationship between America and France. It's going to create a partisan divide between the 2 political parties in the United States. Because they disagree about the support, about giving or not giving support to France. So we're going to take a look at another chart. Okay. And this is called an overly simplified history of political parties in the United States. And what I love about this chart is that it's overly simplified. Because that's what we do. We oversimplify everything. So what this chart is going to do, it's written by a woman called Kathleen Cowell. And while it's trademarked 2016, she only takes us through to 2012. But it's still very worthwhile to look at. She's going to lay out the 6-party systems between the birth of the United States and 2012. Political scientists divide US history up into 6-party systems. If I just go pull out, you'll see the 6 divides here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So political commentators are now discussing when the 7th party system has started. Some say it started in 2008 with the Tea Party. Some say it's too early to tell. We need to wait and see how the Trump government develops. And others are saying 2024, we see the 7th party system. These eras of party systems represent times when the governments were, they represent particular periods of time when before the parties changed. So the political parties in the United States have had different changes over their history. And it's divided up into 6, and now they're looking at the 7th. So what I particularly want to look at here is this first party system. So the this begins in 17 where does it begin actually? 1792. And George Washington is made president. We can see that there are 2 parties, the Federalist Party and the Democratic Republican Party. Now, back in history, it was actually only called the Republican Party. But we now call it the Democratic Republican Party to make sure we don't confuse it with today's Republican Party. It's not related to today's Republican Party. So you can see that at the beginning, these two parties, if you look at the lines, they're joined with George Washington. The founding fathers were very nervous about party politics. They knew that it's dangerous when you have when people when the country's so divided by partisanship. Under George Washington's leadership, his cabinet had both representatives from the Federalist Party and the Democratic Republican Party. So you can see here that the Democratic Republican Party were pro-French. And they were agrarian, with more country people. Farming, etc. The Federalist Party were more aligned to, they believed in pro-British relations. And they were, they wanted a central bank. They were more business related. So John Adams was from the Federalist Party. And we can mark him in 1798. So there was a contention here right in the beginning of their history. Regarding how they were going to relate to the French and the British. And yes, so the Democratic Republican Party wanted to support the French Revolution. So to understand what's happening here, I want to take us back to a media broadcast article. And it was posted earlier in the month. It was an article written by Edward Price for Bloomberg News. Trump's rise marks the end of a long progressive era in the United States. Just want to read a portion of this article, but the whole article needs to be understood. You'll notice this is a picture of Donald Trump addressing the joint session of Congress on March 4. President Donald Trump pledged in his address to Congress Tuesday night to make the United States the most dominant civilization ever to exist on the face of this earth. What exactly is he striving for? It may have been a throwaway line in a ceremonial speech, but after all, this is the president who insists he wants to absorb Canada and Greenland. At home, the scale of Trump's disruptions to the government are critical. They suggest he wants to remove the progressive aspects of the state that have been built up continuously since the 18th century, 1700s. It doesn't appear he will be satisfied until he has cut, or at least drastically curtailed, the ability of the state to regulate industry and support the maintenance of varied rights. So how is he able to do this? Trump has seized upon the tension at the heart of this country. Sorry. The Declaration of Independence in 1776 was radically libertarian. It defied English law. It defied a king. But keeping such rights required a move away from libertarianism through the creation of a constitution in 1789. That meant crafting American law and obeying it too. This contrast doesn't bode well for republicanism, which is a sacred agreement to follow the law. The state we know today was born in the 1780s when elites convened and wrote a constitution. But the nation, the community that empowers that state, was born in the 1770s. It came from agrarian populist rage. The American nation was made by breaking the law. The American state was made by a return to lawfulness. Over time, those contrasting strands of rebelliousness and the law-abiding have been largely reconciled. The spirit of 1776 and the letter of 1789 have fused. Trump's actions might split 1776 and 1789 apart, harnessing the rebellious power of the former to defy the constraining legalism of the latter. That is the only way to dismantle the progressive state altogether, rather than carry out mere reforms. So the article goes on to explain how the government has become more progressive at each major historical turn. So those historical terms can be seen in this graph and the six-party systems. How the country has become more progressive with each stage. So what the author is explaining is the origins of the Democratic Republican Party is the spirit of 1776. It's the populist rage that rose up in revolution. Which explains why its loyalties are to the French. As the French are rising up in their own revolution during this time period. This is the agrarian populist rage that the author speaks of. The Federalist Party represents the letter of 1789. This is the party, the movement that pushed for federal government. A central government that oversaw the states. The Democratic Republican Party is fighting for state autonomy. That their roots are anti-federalism. It was the Federalists that wrote the Constitution. In order to get the anti-federalist states to ratify the Constitution, compromises were made. One of them is the Senate representation and the other is the the Electoral College. They were gone. Sorry, I can't hear you. Could you say it again? Yes, yes. Not talking about individual states, talking about the federal, the state, the federal state. Want to explain that? Sorry if I'm not clear. So thank you. The Federalist Party, think of the Constitution. The Democratic Republican Party, think of the Bill of Rights. They were the ones that said, we'll agree to the Constitution, but you better have a Bill of Rights. So they are amendments to the Constitution, sort of. So the letter of 1789 is the Federalist Party. It's the law. The spirit of 1776 is the Democratic Republican rage. And what the Federalist Party did in this 1798 history was to take advantage of the international affairs and make extra laws to protect their own party. With the Alien and Sedition Acts, John Adams was protecting his party. And stopping any negative reporting on what he was doing. And deporting any immigrants like the Irish and French who would speak up against his government. So this decision was so unpopular that the Federal Party, it really brought the Federal Party to its end. It was widely criticised and protested. See, the Federalist Party controlled the Congress, so they were able to pass these laws that suppressed the opposition party. And it's one of these laws that's still on the books and that Trump is invoking today. The Irish were targeted because they naturally supported the Democratic Republican Party. They were seen as a threat to national security and stability. So it wasn't just the French, the Irish were targeted as well. By 1817, the Federalist Party was practically dead. And it ushered in a period called the Era of Good Feelings. I'll just bring up a... this marked a period in political history that represented unity. It was a temporary end to the two-party system with the death of the Federalist Party. But James Monroe, the president, he represented the last of the revolutionaries that came out of the American Revolution. Did I lose you? Oh, I didn't hear. Okay. So what I want to show here by this graph is the tension that existed within the United States government at its very inception. We can see the dragon power at work. The sixth and the seventh kingdom. The seventh kingdom fails in this history. As the dragon power rises in and out of prophetic history from the story of the Bible, we see its rise and fall within the history of the United States government. And the Federalist Party here is a failure. But what happens? Oh, go on. Is the Federalist Party the Democratic Republican Party is going to adopt some of the Federalist Party's economic policies. And some of its principles. So some of the policies and principles of the Federalist Party actually live on in the Democratic Republican Party. So as we just scroll down, I'm not going to spend too much time on this, the rest of the history. The Democratic Republican Party morphs into the Democratic Party. During the second party system. This is the history of the United States government leading up to civil war. It takes in the election of 1844, which has been covered by this movement. The Democratic Party is the anti-abolition party, and its opposing party is the Whig Party. We note here that it is in this history that the Democratic Party takes on the symbol of the donkey. It will be during the third party system where the Republican Party will take on the symbol of the elephant. What you also note during this history is the rise of third parties. Like the Know Nothings, the Liberties, and the Free Soil parties. And this has an effect on electoral outcomes. So the Democratic Party is going to be anti-abolition, and also pushing manifest destiny. We can notice also that it wants free trade and anti-government spending. And pushing for state sovereignty. So, and the Whig Party, which will morph into the Republican Party, has opposing views on those things. It is in this history and in the history of the third party system of the Civil War that we will see again a failure of the Seventh Kingdom. With the Republican Party here winning the Civil War. As we go down in history, we see less and less of third parties. But never again will we see a bipartisanship between the parties. People become more and more partisan. That is, the parties are separated. It is during the 1888 history that the Dragon Power will also try to rise to power. Represent the Seventh Kingdom. And then we go through the history of the fourth party system. And this is where we see the Democratic Party and the Republican Party change their values. Because of the New Deal and the civil rights of the 1960s, the Democratic Party is going to move to the left and the Republican Party is going to move to the right. And that history has been well covered by the movement. And we have today the Democratic Party being the Progressive Party and the Republican Party being the Conservative Party. And this happened during the fifth party system. Again, covering the history of Roosevelt's New Deal and the civil rights period under Lyndon Johnson. And so this graph will take us down to the six-party system in the 1960s. And leaves us in 2012. With the Tea Party movement developing after the financial crisis of 2008. So again, it's an oversimplification, but still a good representation of the different parties. What I wanted to note today was the tension that existed in 1798 between the two parties. And this tension has continued through the history of the United States. We can mark the sixth and the seventh kingdom through this history. And what the sixth kingdom does is it keeps the seventh kingdom restrained. Which can be clearly seen in the history of the Federalist and Democratic Republican parties. So I'd like to talk a little bit about that restraint. Because in 1798, that is what William Miller wanted to understand. So if you have a Bible handy or on your device, we're going to go to Daniel chapter 8. So there are 4 prophetic lines in the book of Daniel. Each of them have their own theme. Daniel 8 differs from Daniel 2, 7, and 11 because of its theme. We see the same kingdoms of Bible prophecy represented by sacrificial animals. These sacrificial animals are disfigured. They are not quite right. They are not suitable to be brought to the sanctuary. They have blemishes. So you have a ram that has one horn higher than the other. And a he-goat that has a horn between its eyes. Both things would keep that animal from being used in the sanctuary. They would be considered blemishes. So the theme of Daniel chapter 8 is apostate religions. Counterfeit religions. So the religion of Medo Persia and Greece is represented by the animals. And we know that those animals are tied to the horns of the altar. And the blood of that animal is transferred to the sanctuary through the horns of the altar. So the little horn that's represented is of Rome. And the philosophy, ideology, religions, culture of the previous kingdoms is transferred to pagan Rome. Pagan Rome is the little horn of Daniel 8. So we're going to jump in verse 9. It says, and out of one of them, or out of one of the winds of heaven, from verse 8, comes forth a little horn. It comes from the west. It comes from the west wind. It's going to exalt itself and become exceeding great. Towards the south and the east and the glorious land. It's because it's coming from the west. So when in verse 9, it is talking about pagan Rome. Because it is using masculine pronouns. In verse 10, we see the use of feminine pronouns. That word it would be better translated she or her. So the feminine pronouns are referring to papal Rome, the church. So the church is also going to wax great or exalt itself. It's going to become a persecuting power. And stamp the stars on the ground, the leaders that are in opposition to it. In verse 11, we're going to oscillate or spin around and go back to pagan Rome. It is a repeat and enlarge of verses 9 and 10. Yea, he, pagan Rome, will exalt itself even more, even to the Prince of Hosts, or even to crucifying the Christ. And by pagan Rome, the daily will be taken away. And the place of pagan Rome's sanctuary will be cast down. So pagan Rome is going to take away the daily. And we'll read verse 12, which is a repeat and enlarge of verse 10. And an host or army was given it, or her, the church, papal Rome. Against the daily, whatever the daily is. By reason of transgression or the sin of church and state combining. And papal Rome will rule supremely for 1260 years. So when William Miller got to these verses, as he was studying through the Bible, he got really stuck here. And William Miller wouldn't go any further than what he understood. So he spent a considerable amount of time trying to work out what this daily was. There are two desolating powers, pagan Rome and papal Rome. And it is pagan Rome that is going to take away the daily. Apostate Protestantism was teaching that this daily was one of the Seleucid kings, Antiochus Epiphanes. Yep, that was it. And for many reasons, this didn't sit well with Miller. So if you keep your finger there and go to 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, we'll find where Miller saw the answer. So the Thessalonians had a problem. They were Adventists. They believed in the imminent return of Jesus Christ. And the problem was that some of their members were dying. And they thought, oh no, these members are going to miss out on the second coming. The Jews had a very poor understanding of the state of the dead. And Paul had to explain to the Thessalonians and to the Corinthians what happened when you died. But the Thessalonians also had a very fervent belief in prophecy. So what Paul is going to do is he's going to explain to them that Jesus can't come back yet. I know you want Jesus to come, but stuff has to happen first. And Paul's going to give a commentary on Daniel chapter 11 to the Thessalonians. He's going to paraphrase Daniel 11, verses 36 and 37. And tell them that the man of sin has to come first. In verse 5, Paul says, don't you remember that I did that study with you on Daniel 11 when I last visited you? Verse 6, and now ye know what withholdeth, that he might be revealed in his time. He's saying that the man of sin can't come yet because somebody's restraining him. And you know who this restraining power is. But I can't mention him by name or I'll go to jail quicker than I want to. So Paul never says Rome out loud, or I should say, writes it down. Paul says, for the mystery of iniquity doth already work, only he who now letteth will let until he be taken out of the way. There is a mystery of iniquity at work in the time of the early Christian church. And that mystery of iniquity is being restrained by, is being restrained and won't be able to rise up until the restraining power is taken away. So William Mill was able to put these verses together and see that the restraining power of the man of sin or the papacy was pagan Rome. The mystery of iniquity or the man of sin was already working. Only the power that's restraining it has to be taken out of the way. Removed. So Paul is quoting from Daniel 11. And if we go back to Daniel 11, verse 31, we'll see a different version of events than to Daniel chapter 8. In Daniel 11, verse 31, it says, "And an army shall stand on the papacy's side." "And that army shall pollute the sanctuary of strength," or the city of Rome, "and take away the daily, and place the abomination that maketh desolate." In this verse here, the daily, or the continual, which is what it means, the power that's been around from the beginning has to be taken away in order for the papacy to rise up. The army that's given to the papacy is the pagan Roman army. It takes away, removes entirely paganism, and places the abomination of desolation, or the church and state power that will rule for 1260 years. So Miller understood from Thessalonians that the restraining power was pagan Rome. And that it had to be taken away for the papacy to rise. Paul is referencing Daniel chapter 11. When you go to back to Daniel chapter 8, the army that's given against the daily when it says in verse 11 that the daily was taken away, that's a different word for taken away that is used in Daniel 11 and in Thessalonians. That it's a sanctuary term for when you took away the sacrifice from off the altar, but you lifted it up and exalted it. The word used in Daniel 11 for take away is when you say took away the ashes from the altar and got rid of them outside the sanctuary. Or you took away the scapegoat and took it into the wilderness. This word take away is also borrowed from sanctuary language. But it means to lift up and exalt. So you might be taking it away from the altar, but you are lifting it up and exalting it to God. So this is understood in a counterfeit sense. That it was paganism that took away paganism. It was the pagan Roman armies that converted from paganism to Catholicism. That started with Clovis, the king of the Franks, the beginning of the French kingdom. France dates its birth from the baptism of Clovis. Clovis was a pagan king who converted to Catholicism. It is in that sense that paganism took away paganism. And those Christianized armies uprooted pagan horns. So it was also responsible for literally taking away and getting rid of the remainder of paganism. So what we want to note from these chapters is that there is a continual that needs to be taken away in order for the man of sin to rise up. So when we look at the history of the United States government, we know that one of its symbols that, for us to understand is that it represents Rome. It is it is symbolized in one story as Rome. And as we follow the history of its political parties, and come to 1989, we are going to see the seventh kingdom try and rise again. Just as in 1798, that they were both present, but there was a tension between them. And that the seventh kingdom failed in that history. We come to 1989 and we can overlay that same history. We have the sixth and the seventh kingdom present in 1989 at the time of the end. But right through the history of the United States, we see there has been a continual or a daily. Daniel 8 and Daniel 11 represent two sides of the same coin. In one sense, something has to be totally taken out of the way. But in another sense, it is lifted up and exalted. And this is what has been achieved through the overtaking of the Republican Party. So we see the old Republican Party taken away. It is a new beast, a new Republican Party. But the principles that actuated that party from the very beginning have just been lifted up and exalted. If we go back to the initial parties and their push for control over trade, anti-abolition, all those things that we see in the beginning history, they have just been modernized and lifted up and exalted in this new Republican Party. So we need to see what is taken away and what is lifted up. So I think that's where I'm going to end the study today, because I'd like to continue springboard from that in my next study. Are there any questions so far? Yes. So I need to repeat your question. I missed the beginning of what you said. Sorry, could you just repeat it? Okay, so Justina is asking if the issues that we see today regarding trade and immigration are a repeat, is that correct, of what we see in the 1798 history? And yeah, so I would say yes, the issues that plagued the country from its birth. It wants to be, there was an element right at its beginning that wanted to be a unilateral power. It was happy to make treaties as long as that it benefited itself. It was transactional. And it was only too happy to forget old alliances for current benefits. These economic decisions also had effect on how it treated people. This new country needed immigration. What the Federalist Party wanted to do was control that immigration so there would be no dissenting voices. Ultimately, it was that decision that brought about its downfall. It didn't mind immigration as long as it was slavery. But no, French or Irish voices were to be heard. No voice that would stop the growth of economic prosperity. So economic prosperity trumped human rights. I think that what we're seeing Trump do today is deport people that have been speaking out against his administration. Speaking against his administration. So there are many people, many innocent people being caught up in that gathering of so-called illegal immigrants. Just as John Adams used the excuse of invasion to bring in these 4 laws, Donald Trump is doing the same. Because the law isn't just about being at war with somebody, it's also about being invaded. And the Trump administration is calling the illegal immigrants an invasion. So this is a good illustration of what we began the study with. What the manosphere looks like at a corporate level. Exerting its strength, treading on human rights, how it looks. So the original article was about the poor body image of young men. And what the Trump administration wants to do is improve its body image to the world. So if you go back to that political cartoon of 1798 and see how the world was viewing the international affairs, the Adams administration would have looked at that cartoon and said, that's poor body image. So the Federalist Party, sorry, I lost you. I'm not sure, I can't hear you. So the Federalist Party would have looked at that cartoon and would have thought that it represented itself very poorly. Being represented as a vulnerable young woman. Weak and defenseless, being robbed by the French. So that's how the world was viewing them. They were going to react like a dragon. And that, and yes, that it was a incorrect illustration of how America reacted to that situation. It was determined to win out in economic trade, regardless of the debts it owed, and also to silence any dissenting voices. And it did that very effectively. But it did it at a cost, and it brought about the end of the Federalist Party. Now, thank you for the question, because I think it helped clarify that.
Hello, Elder Terry.
Hello, big voice.
It's Liberty.
Hello, Liberty.
I'm good, Elder. And thank you
Thanks.
for giving much clarity on this subject. Um, Mine is a bit of a comment with a question. That whenever United States uh, gets into a crisis, like for example in 2001, George Bush declared a war against jihad, and he called that war on terror. But in reverse, it was really a war on democracy, a war within. That he began to campaign that people should give up some of their liberties and freedoms in order for them to curb the problem externally. And I think this is the same scenario right at the inception of the United States, where there is a problem with France and Britain. That they used that crisis as an excuse to rip apart human rights by those Alien and Sedition Acts. So I thought to just have that rough compare and contrast of 2001 and the history. Now, my question is on the daily and on the daily. Where one part of the daily is exalted and another part is taken away, as you demonstrated. Taken away means to be discarded. Is it a correct understanding that I got that 1776, the populist rage, the agrarian populist rage aspect is being exalted now, and the 1789 lawfulness, constitution, federalism is being taken away now? So that's my question.
Yeah, I thank you for your comment. Yeah, I can see that. And if you compare the XYZ affair with 2001, we can see that they both we can see the connection of trade. It's not a coincidence that it was the world trade centers that were targeted. And that shouldn't be lost when we consider the war on terror. The founding of the Marine and Navy Corps was to counter the war on terror that France was pirating their economy. And yet it was all solved peaceably by 1800 in 2 years. So it was a quasi-war. There was no direct confrontation. But the situation was used to centralize executive power. Just as a side note, if you're familiar with the autobiography of Joseph Bates, his, he left home as a cabin boy on ships when I think he was about 14 or 15. And he got caught up in all that French and British warring. First kidnapped by the British and then by the French. If I ever got stuck on a desert island, one of the books I'd like to have is his autobiography. It's a great read. But that history between America, France, and Britain is really tied into early Adventism. So thank you for your comments and tying that early history in with 2001.
You're welcome. Oh, okay. So Justina has asked about the Obama and the restraining power on the Republican Party. So it's the Sixth Kingdom that has that restraining power on the Seventh Kingdom. When we go back to the roots of the Sixth Kingdom, where it had a restraining power on the Federalist Party, as just mentioned before, it is that populist rage that has been, I guess, lifted up and exalted now. So it was the roots of that party, but the party did change during one of the phases and went to the left.
But in Daniel chapter 8, we're following philosophies and ideologies. And they can be taken up by other entities. And so we see the philosophy of each party changed during one of the periods. Oh, I've forgotten the question. Sorry, I'm getting tired. Yeah. Yes, so that political system was a restraint on the seventh kingdom. The Republican Party itself was meant to be the gatekeeper. So thank you for bringing that up. Just like pagan Rome took away pagan Rome, the Republican Party took away the Republican Party. So in one sense, it's taken away and it's a new party. In another sense, it's just been lifted up and exalted. And so what we see now is a combination of church and state, but we redefine what the church is and we redefine what the state is. We no longer talk about churches or the papacy. We talk about culture, ideology, philosophy. So Revelation 17 talks about the eighth kingdom. There is no literal eighth kingdom. What it is the first kingdom. If you consider the seven churches, what is this movement? It's the eighth church. It's Ephesus. So we're Philadelphia, we're the sixth church, and we're the first church, we're Ephesus. In the same way that the seventh church makes an image to the fifth, but it's also the eighth because it's the first church. Sorry, the first kingdom. And the first kingdom is Babylon. So all the eighth is telling us is that what we're seeing is modern Babylon. Which is a coalition of the dragon, the beast, and the false prophet. And at the International Camp meeting, I explained how you can see in MAGA the religions of apostate Protestantism, Catholicism, and all the isms. So within MAGA, you can see paganism lifted up and exalted. it wants to do away with pluralism, but in a sense, it has exalted pluralism in its very existence. It is at its very essence hypocritical. And got to be blind Freddy not to see the hypocrisy as we watch the news every day. So I thank you for your questions. I can see where there's a need for clarity, and I hope to continue this study. Thank you. If you have any further questions, please don't feel free to write to me as well. They really help to develop. I'm sorry, I'm getting old. Yeah, I'm an early to bed person, but I do appreciate that you've made the effort to start your worship early today to accommodate me. So thank you so much. So it's been an early day for you too. Thank you. I'll close in prayer. Our loving God in heaven, I do thank you for this opportunity. I thank you for this ministry, and I pray that you would bless it and bless the movement as we move forward. Dear God, we want truth, not only just on an intellectual level, but we want to be sanctified by it. So may it do its appointed work in us as we surrender all that we have and all that we are on your altar. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. I'm sorry I've kind of hit a wall. So thank you for your patience. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. God bless. Blessed rest of the Sabbath to you.
Thank you, Elder.